generations of people in Bavel, led by their Chacham and Gedolim, not going to Eretz Yisrael. So that's a shita, a Torah-dik shita, that they actually didn't have to go. And just to point to Gemaras that say, well, look, Rosh Lakish hates them, Rosh Bechanan hates them, that in itself doesn't make the problem irrelevant. Meaning, the fact is that there were generations of Jews in Babel led by Gedolim and Chachamim who chose not to go to Eretz Yisrael. What do we make of that? What explains that? Is that a Torah Shita? And who's the halacha like? Is the halacha like those people who stayed behind in Babel and whatever that Shita represents as in a Torah way? Or is the halacha like Birchan and Rish Lakish? And now I want to bring it even further. We can actually point to a very specific Chacham and say that he argues on Birchan and Rish Lakish, and that's Rav. Because what happens like this, Rish Lakish would not, this is Rish Lakish, we're talking about 500 years after the Aliyah of Ezra. And he wouldn't, more actually, about 600 years, and he wouldn't give his hand to a Bavli, right? Rabbi Bachana comes, he gives him his hand, Rish Lakish is like, I'm not taking your hand, because I'm against the Bavli, and they should have come back. Rabbi Yochanan, when he sees Bavli in Eretz Yisrael, he was mekanter them. He would say negative things to them. Because he says, look, my God hates them, so I'm going to hate them too, or hates on them. That's Torah. That's not stam racism. That's coming from Torah. Okay, so it's a shita about the Bavliim, and we should be negative to the Bavliim. But then we have Rav, who went from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, engaged with the Bavliim, and was biyas the yeshiva of Surah in Bavel. So I want to ask you a question. Rish Lakish wouldn't give a hand to a Bavli. And Rabbi Yochanan, that we see Bavliim in Eretz Yisrael, when he saw Bavliim in Eretz Yisrael, he would say nasty things to them. Does Rav hold like that? Of course not. Rav went to Bavel and established the yeshiva for them in Bavel. So that's a machloikis, a Torah-dik machloikis. So to point to you, Medafta, say, look, Rish Lakish doesn't like the Bavli. To point to Medrash and Shir say, look, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't like the Bavliim. So these Bavliim are such bad people. I said, yeah. But Rav does like the Bavliim. So it's not just these anonymous Chachamim and Gedolim through 500 years who stayed in Bavel and didn't come back with Ezra that we have to explain, but it's actually Rav who in the Tkufa of Rabbi Rish Lakish did the opposite of Rabbi Rish Lakish and embraced the Bavliim. Apparently he is pro-Bavli. And that's something we have to understand. What's that about? By the way, this is something that the Rabbi Moshe mentions correctly. He says, this is number 15 of the source. In the source, he says there was a chain of Torah and Kedusha in Bavel throughout the whole Zman HaBayis. And that's true. And that's very significant. And what does that tell us? By the way, the two sources there, I just bring in the source sheet 13 and 14, I show that Rav came down to Bavel, and that was a turning point in the community of Bavel, as the Gemara says in Gittin. From the time Rav came to Bavel, Bavel became like a status of Eretz Yisrael, because Rav made yeshiva there. So Rav was very engaged with the community of Bavel when his colleagues, Yibircha and Rish Lakish, were anti the community of Bavel. So if they were anti-Bavel because they should have come back in the days of Ezra, then Rav, who is pro-Bavel, engaged with Bavel, that suggests that Rav holds that maybe they didn't have to come back in the days of Ezra. Like all those Chacham who stayed behind, and that's something we have to understand. So meaning like this, again, let's clarify exactly what the question is. Imagine you had it's a shocking thing if you think about it. Beis HaMikdash was being built after 70 years in Galus Bavel. Yirmiyah predicted after 70 years I'm going to remember you, and everyone's going back to Exile and building the Beis HaMikdash. Well, not everyone actually. No, not everyone. The Chachamim and the Gedolim and the elite stay behind. Shocking. They didn't go and build or involve themselves in the Beis HaMikdash. And then the Beis HaMikdash was built, and 50 years later they still stayed behind. And they thrived in Bavel with Torah and Chachma, instead of joining their brethren in Eretz Yisrael and participating in the Geula. What to make of this? What do we make of this? And why didn't they go? And according to Ramban, it's certainly Pal Ramban. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. It's the Raisa. So what are they doing not going to Eretz Yisrael? Shocking. It's shocking. It needs to be explained. If one is going to have an opinion based on other sources, which one should have, as we've been discussing, that living in Eretz Yisrael is very important, then how do you explain why did these people imagine if today someone built a Beis HaMikdash and there would be and you'd have thriving Torah and Eretz, you have thriving Torah. But let's say someone built a Beis HaMikdash, we're not going. What are you doing? What's that about? How do you explain that shita? Okay, so that's what we have to talk about now. But the truth is like this. The truth is that we don't have to look for Torahs. We don't have to speculate. The Medrash Tanchuma gives us the whole theory of why the Chacham stayed behind the Babel. And this is there in the source sheet number 16 by Arichas. The Medrash Tanchuma talks about Torah Shabbat Peh, and how Torah Shabbat Peh requires a great commitment, up to even Mesiras Nefesh, and the bris between Hashem and Bnei Israel depends on Torah Shabbat Peh. The only one who can learn Torah Shabbat Peh is someone who loves Hashem b'chol leiv, b'chol nefesh, b'chol ma'od. Ayin Sham, it's really interesting. It says v'havta es Hashem l'kecha. The first parsha of Shema is for someone who learns Torah Shabbat Peh. Second parsha of Shema, where it doesn't say ma'od, is for someone who learns Torah Shabbat Peh. Really interesting things there. Then it goes like this. But anyways, talking about Torah Shabbat Peh, how important it is, and he says that's why Hashem made it 2 yeshivas in Bavel, so that they should learn Torah the day and night, and get together for Shurim in the Shurei Kala in Adar and Elul. Okay, and those 2 yeshivas, says the Medrash, we recorded this before, that that those 2 yeshivas were there from the days of Yechanya, from the days of Yechanya, in the end of Bayis Rishon there was Torah and Bavel. And then the Medrash says like this: those 2 yeshivas never experienced not Shvi and not Shemad and not Sholol, Yavan and Edom or in Sholet to them. And Hashem brought them out 12 years before the Churban Yerushalayim with the Torah and the Talmud, as the pasuk says, Charash HaMaskir. And it was a kindness that Hashem did to take out the elite before the Galus, so they can establish the Torah in Bavel, so that the Torah Shabbat Peh should not be forgotten. They were there from Bavel from then till today. Edom and Yavan were not Sholet on them. They didn't decree Shemad on them. And Limos HaMashiach, they're also not going to see Chavlei Mashiach. And from there, from Bavel, they're going to go up to Eretz Yisrael. And then it quotes a pasuk, Haitzion Himolti Yeshevas Bas Bavel. If you stay in Bavel, you avoid Edom and Yavan and their decrees, and you're going to live in peace. So, wow. Let me tell you what it's saying. Okay, it's amazing. Edom, Yavan, the exist. That's what happened in Eretz Yisrael during the Tkufa of Bayis Sheni. During the Tkufa of Bayis Sheni, there was Yavan, as we all know, and there was the Shemad and the Shalom. There were wars and the Chashmonon, etc., etc. And of course, there was Edom at the end of Bayis Sheni. And the Medrash is saying, wait a second, look what happened in Bavel. In Bavel, they were secure. They lived Shalev and Shaket and Beiteach, able to learn Torah Yom V'Layla from the days of Yechanya until through Bayis Sheni and afterwards. There was not Yavan, there was no Edom, there was no Shema, there was no Shalom, there was no Shavi. So what the Medrash is doing, it's saying like this: it's saying, in order for the Torah to be preserved in Shlemos, undisrupted, undisturbed by all the tsaris that were happening in Eretz Yisrael during Bayis Sheni, there had to be an elite that stayed behind in Babel. This Medrash Tanchuma Noach Siman Gimel is the Hezber for Babylonian Jewry in the days of Bayis Sheni. Ayin Sham. Again, imagine you're returning to Eretz Yisrael. Imagine the 70 years of Babel are up, and Ezra's going back, and he's taking back some people with him, right? You say, wait a second. Where are they going back to? They're going back to Eretz Yisrael, right? People are going back with Ezra to Eretz Yisrael. But look, during the Tkuf of Bayis Sheni, there was no perfect Geula. They were still under Shibud Malchias, as we discussed maybe 2 weeks ago, I think, from the Chaste Kreskas, that even during Bayis Sheni, there was no complete Geula. So they're going to suffer Shmad, Shalol, Shvi, Edom, Yavan. If we want to preserve the Torah completely, then that elite Torah people who left Eretz Yisrael early, 12 years before the Churban, to preserve the Torah, should also not go back now, because the same way Hashem sent them out before the Churban so that they should preserve the Torah, even though the Beis Hamikdash wasn't destroyed yet, but there were a lot of tsaros in Eretz Yisrael towards the end of Bayis Rishon. So he said, you have to get out of the way, go start establishing Torah in Bavel. Similarly, just because they go back to Eretz Yisrael, if they're not going back to Geula Shlema, they're not going back to being free from Shibud Malchias. In order for the Torah to be preserved, you needed the elite Torah people to stay behind in Bavel. An amazing thing. Now, very important to note that this is not true according to Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says, if you guys would return to Eretz Yisrael, then the Shechina would have returned, then it would have been a Geula Shlema. And the fact that there were tsaros of Eretz Yisrael, and there was still Shibud Malchias, and that there was Edom and Yavan and Shemad and Shvi and Shalom was Gufa because you didn't return, so it's not an excuse. But if you hold like Rabbi Yochanan, that even had they returned, the Shechina would have come back. So we're not talking about a Geula Shlema. Bayis Sheni could not have been the perfect Geula where the Shechina returns, and that's because the Bayis was being built by a Persian descendant from Yefes. If that's the case, then you're going back to Eretz Yisrael and Bayis Sheni to a land that's going to have there's going to be a lot of volatility, and there's going to be a lot of friction between the powers that be. Edom and Yavan. And that's not a recipe for preserving the Torah in its most perfect way. So therefore they stay behind the bubble. And I want to tell you something, there's actually echoes of this, a couple of places in Shas. One of them is in Sukkot Daf, meaning in the Babylonian, Sukkot Daf Chof, Sukkot Daf Chof. The Gemara says that Betchila kishen nishtakha Torah mi-Yisrael, Allah Ezra mi-Bavel v'yasta, Chazav nishtakha, Allah Hillel ha-Bavli v'yasta, Chazav nishtakha, Allah Reb Ubanav v'yastua. So the Gemara is saying that whenever the Torah would be forgotten, was at risk of being forgotten, a Bavli would come to the rescue. First it was Ezra, then it was Hillel, and then it was Reb Ubanav. Now you have to read the Gemara like they're saying, what's the most point? What's the most point? Why is the Gemara saying a Bavli would always come and remind them of the Torah? And the answer is because that's a reference to this idea that the Torah in Eretz Yisrael during Bayis Sheni had tkufis of crisis where it could have been forgotten, and that's because Eretz Yisrael and Bayis Sheni was a dangerous place. It wasn't a very safe place for Jews. That's it, simple as that. It wasn't a very safe place for Jews. Why? Because the powers that be might sometimes have to repress the Jews in Eretz Yisrael from becoming too uppity and becoming too independent. And that's Shvi and Shalom and Shema. And if that sounds to you like the Shavuos, the idea of the Shavuos, it's because it is. While if the Jews who stay behind in Bavel are safe and sound, and they're the ones who could preserve the Torah, the Shleim. So that's what Gemara is referencing in Sukkah. Whenever the Torah was at risk of being forgotten, you needed someone from Bavel, where they preserved the Torah in its pristine, perfect way because they had such peace and quiet. They were able to have the yeshivas thriving in Bavel. And that's why they stayed behind, in order to preserve the Torah in its perfection. So what does that mean? So what happened to the mitzvah? Wait a second. Very nice. You want to keep the Torah, you want to preserve the Torah. So Geshem at the mitzvah. The mitzvah is a mitzvah of the mitzvah. According to the Ramban, it's a mitzvah of the Raisa. Teretz is, as we've discussed at length, the idea of the Shavuos teaches us that very nice is a mitzvah. Very nice is, of course, is a mitzvah, but the idea of the Shavuos is that you have to consider security of the nation. You have to consider economic conditions. You have to consider social conditions, and you have to consider spiritual conditions. And we, the Ummah, the nation, has a job to preserve the Torah. And if Eretz Yisrael is not going to be the optimal place for preserving the Torah, then stay behind in Babel, Mivat on Eretz Yisrael, which means, what does Mivat on Eretz Yisrael? It means, of course, after 70 years of Galus Babel, there was a Pekida. As Yirmiyah said, there was a Pekida. But it doesn't mean everyone should go. Some people should go and build a Bayis Sheni. But everyone should go? No way. Chachmei Babel said, no way everyone should go. If everyone goes, Torah Matahela, who's going to preserve the Torah? You're going to Eretz Yisrael, you're going to a tinderbox. It's a dangerous place to be. It's a place where the Yavan and Edom, etc., are going to be rule over you. And going to make tzaras for you. So it's not going to be the ideal place for Torah learning. So basically, like it would have been the Chik Saketz if they would have all gone back and were mamish in the Chik Saketz, because they're saying, "Oh, we could go live in Eretz." No, you can't. Think about it. You have a Torah job to do, and that requires peace and quiet. Again, according to Rish Lakish, there would have been a Gula Shleim if they would have all come back. So Rish Lakish says, "You guys should all come back, of course." But if you hold like Rabbi Yochanan that there wouldn't have been a Gula Shleima, then the Chachamim will say, "Wait a second, we don't believe there's going to be a Gula Shleima if we all come back." So we're talking about should we come back to a quasi Gula, which is going to be dangerous. No, Im Kain, say the Chachmei Bavel, and Rav agrees with them. You should stay behind in Bavel. So we need these three shittas here. Three shittas basically. Rish Lakish says, Hashem wants you to come back, and the Shekhinah is going to return to Mil Gula Shleima. No excuses. Okay. Then there's the other extreme. The Chachmei Bavel and Rav holds like them were saying that the Shekhinah is not returning anyways. It's also a dangerous place to live during Bayis Sheni, which is taka what happened. Again, only because they didn't come back with the Shlokish. But according to them, they hold no. Exile is going to be a dangerous place. There's no Gula Shleima around the corner. Therefore, we have to stay in a safe place to preserve the Torah. Rabbi Yochanan is in between, right? Because Rabbi Yochanan says the Shekhinah is not returning anyways. But Afal Pikin, he holds that the Babylonian should have returned. Now, what the Machlokes about Rish Lakish is about, whether the Shekhinah would have returned, and as we said before, like the Kuzri says basically in the 11th century, that the Shekhinah is waiting for us. So he's going like Rish Lakish. What the Machlokes is about and what that says about today, that's something we're going to get to together. What the Machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan is about, again, Rabbi Yochanan says the Shekhinah is not returning, but Afal Pikin you should come. Rav says the Shekhinah is not returning, therefore this whole shtick of Torah of the Tanchuma that we have to preserve the Torah. What that Machlokes is about is Inkam Klaimer, not for now. but it's not relevant to us either, really. I don't believe. But what's interesting is though that Rabbi Yochanan himself may have been chayzer, and that's because that's the Rashi in Sukkah Daf Mem Daled, where Rabbi Yochanan said Del Choin Amri Del Hoin Hi, which Rashi says means I used to think, says Rabbi Yochanan, he was telling his Talmidim in Eretz Yisrael, I used to think the Torah is yours. You guys in Eretz Yisrael, I used to think you have the Torah because you're not in Galus. But now I realize, because he met Rav Kahana from Babel, he says, now I realize that actually the Babylonian have preserved the Torah. So which tells us something very interesting, right? Because why did they stay behind in Babel, says Tanchuma? Kedei that they should preserve the Torah. And they should be able to come to the rescue when the Torah may be forgotten. Rabbi Yochanan originally held that the real Torah is in Eretz Yisrael. Oh, and Rabbi Yochanan Taka in the Medrash Yashirim, he used to be Mekan to the Babylonian. Shtims, because he held Torah is in Eretz Yisrael. But the Ma'aseh, we know Rabbi Yochanan was Chayzer. And he realized that actually the Iker Torah was in Babel. So it could be then Rabbi Yochanan says, oh, the Iker Torah is in Babel. You know what? I'm coming around. I'm no longer going to Mekan to the Babylon. I understand why they stayed behind. Because actually they preserved the Torah. Okay, that's parenthetical. It's a matter of Muzgar. It's not so important for us. What's important for us, again, is like this. So just to put it all together. This is really important for us. Really, really important. Just to summarize what we discussed today. There was a period where Eretz Yisrael was thriving in a way. There was a Beis HaMikdash, and yet there was generations of Gedolim, B'Tovim, B'Chachamim, that didn't live in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Now we know why. Because Eretz Yisrael may have been thriving in the Beis HaMikdash, but it was a dangerous place to be. The proof that it was a dangerous place to be is that history actually bore that out. We see that the Yevonim and the Edomim, there was Gzeirus and Shemad and Shvi and Shlomo in Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, the wise men of Bavel, the elite who went with Yechonja, said, you know what, we're staying here because we have a job to do, which is to preserve the Torah. And the best conditions for preserving the Torah are in Galus. And when the best conditions for preserving the Torah are in Galus, then do not go to Eretz Yisrael. Do your job of preserving the Torah in Galus. Some people should go, but the elite or the Torah people, whatever the people who are going to do that job should not go. Now, what can we learn from this today? Okay, that's a big question. What can we learn from this? So, now, here's the answer. Very simple. If somebody believes that we have something very important to do here in Chutz La'aretz that we can't do in Eretz Yisrael, I mean to say something as a nation that we're supposed to be working at, let's say preserving the Torah in a certain way or learning Torah in a certain way. If there's something that we could only do in Chutz La'aretz that we can't do in Eretz Yisrael in its current matzav today, then certainly we should make sure to stay behind in America or wherever we are, if there's something for us to be doing. I personally don't think there is something. I can't think of something that we need to be here for in the current state, that we have to dafka be in Chutz La'aretz and we can't be doing in Eretz Yisrael. Certainly in terms of Torah, I don't believe that there's Torah that we can do in Chutz La'aretz that we can't do in Eretz Yisrael. So I don't think there's something like that. If there's something, if someone thinks that there is something that requires us to be dafka in this out of Eretz Yisrael, please let me know. Please tell me that. But that's my opinion. So again, what we're saying is like this. We learned from Babel something very important, that there's an idea that you have to think about broadly about Klal Yisrael and what they're doing, what they're accomplishing, and you have to think about what conditions are going to allow for those accomplishments. And if Eretz Yisrael is in a state where it won't supply the conditions necessary for those even spiritual accomplishments, then that's also like a Dechikas Aketz kind of idea, and we should not indeed transplant everyone to Eretz Yisrael. Like I said, I don't think that there's something like that today. I think what we're doing in Chutz La'aretz is also being done in Eretz Yisrael, and in many ways being done better, and it's being done differently, but I think we can definitely join forces today and go back to Eretz Yisrael as far as this is concerned. So that's it. What we're going to see in the next discussion, we're going to see is that there was actually some opposition to people returning. Meaning, like we saw in that Gemara, Shlokish said to Rabbi Bachana, he didn't want to give him his hand. Now Rabbi Bachana was coming to Eretz Yisrael. So that Gemara, and we'll show other places, demonstrate that people who didn't come at the right time, the Babylonian, were not welcome to come again. And that's something very important. It teaches us this idea, which we're going to explore. Perhaps teaches like a new idea about some people actually don't belong in Eretz Yisrael. That's what we're going to get to next time, and that's all for now.